This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.
Mary Smith stepped off the carriage, her eyes wide with wonder. She took in the quaint village of Cranford, a stark contrast to the bustling town of Drumble she had left behind. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of freshly baked bread and blooming flowers. Mary breathed deeply, feeling the tension in her shoulders ease as she absorbed the tranquil atmosphere. The cobblestone street beneath her feet seemed to whisper tales of bygone days, each stone worn smooth by countless footsteps. As she made her way down the street, Mary couldn't help but notice the peculiar rhythm of Cranford. It was as if time itself had slowed down, like honey dripping from a spoon. The village moved at its own leisurely pace, unhurried and unbothered by the frantic energy of the outside world. What struck Mary most, however, was the abundance of older, unmarried women who seemed to rule the roost in this sleepy hamlet. They moved about with purpose, their heads held high, as if they were the keepers of some great secret. No sooner had she set foot in the village square than she was warmly greeted by the Jenkyns sisters, Miss Deborah and Miss Matty. The contrast between the two was as stark as a winter's night and a summer's day. Miss Deborah, the elder, carried herself with the air of a general, her chin held high and her opinions even higher. Her voice when she spoke was crisp and authoritative, brooking no argument. Miss Matty, on the other hand, was a gentle soul. Her kind eyes crinkled at the corners as she welcomed Mary with a warm smile that seemed to envelop her like a soft blanket. Her voice was soft and melodious, a soothing counterpoint to her sister's sharp tones. As the days passed, Mary found herself drawn into the intricate web of Cranford society. She marveled at the practice of elegant economy, where the ladies of the town performed a delicate balancing act between maintaining their genteel facade and stretching their limited means. It was like watching a troupe of acrobats on a tightrope, each step carefully measured to avoid a fall from grace. Her first Cranford tea party at the Jenkyns home was an eye-opening experience. The moment she stepped through the door, the scent of Earl Grey and freshly baked scones enveloped her. The air hummed with the quiet murmur of conversation, punctuated by the delicate clink of china cups against saucers. Mary watched, fascinated, as the ladies engaged in a carefully choreographed dance of polite conversation and subtle one-upmanship. It was as if she had stumbled upon a secret society with its own set of unspoken rules and rituals. She sipped her tea from a delicate china cup, its pattern of delicate roses, stark contrast to the sturdy mug she was used to in Drumble. As the afternoon wore on, Mary learned of the town's peculiar taboos. Money, it seemed, was a subject as forbidden as a risque novel in a vicar's library. Instead, the ladies preferred to while away their time with card games, their fingers nimbly shuffling decks as their tongues wagged with the latest gossip. Speaking of gossip, Mary soon met Miss Pole, the town's self-appointed town crier. With her sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing and a tongue as quick as a whip, Miss Pole kept everyone informed of the minutest happenings in Cranford. Her words spread through the town like ripples in a pond, touching every corner and crevice. Then there was Mrs. Jamieson, Cranford's resident aristocrat. She lived in a grand house that seemed to have been plucked from a fairy tale and dropped unceremoniously into the middle of the village. Its imposing facade and manicured gardens stood out like a peacock among pigeons. Her constant companion was a pampered lapdog that Mary suspected ate better than most of the villagers. The dog's jeweled collar glinted in the sunlight, a testament to its mistress's wealth and status. As the days turned into weeks, Mary found herself drawn more and more to the kind-hearted Miss Matty. The older woman took Mary under her wing, guiding her through the labyrinth of Cranford's social norms with a gentle hand and a warm smile. In Miss Matty's company, Mary felt the stirrings of a friendship that promised to weather any storm. Slowly but surely, Mary began to see the charm in Cranford's unhurried pace. The village, with its quirks and quibbles, its triumphs and tribulations, began to feel like home. As she walked down the street, nodding to familiar faces and exchanging pleasantries, Mary felt a sense of belonging wash over her. She realized that beneath the surface of polite smiles and afternoon teas lay a strong sense of community, a bond that tied the residents of Cranford together like an invisible thread. Mary began to appreciate the charm of Cranford's slow-paced life and the strong sense of community among its residents. As she settled into her new life, she found herself looking forward to each new day, eager to uncover more of the secrets and stories that lay hidden in the heart of this remarkable little village. Just as Mary was beginning to feel truly at home in Cranford, a whisper of change rippled through the town. Rumors began to circulate of new arrivals, a Captain Brown and his two daughters. As Mary watched the ladies of Cranford flutter with excitement and trepidation, she couldn't help but wonder, would these newcomers be welcomed into the fold, or would they upset the delicate balance of Cranford society? The peaceful routine of the village seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm that was surely coming. The peaceful routine of Cranford was about to be disrupted. The arrival of Captain Brown and his two daughters would soon shake the foundations of the quiet town. A crisp autumn breeze rustled through the leaves of the ancient oak trees lining Cranford's cobblestone streets. The air was thick with anticipation, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Behind lace-trimmed windows, curious eyes peered out as the Brown family's carriage rumbled into town, its wheels clattering against the stones like a harbinger of change. The ladies of Cranford, their corsets pulled tight and their manners even tighter, felt their hearts flutter with a mixture of excitement and dread. Mrs. Jamieson's cat, usually content to lounge in the sunny parlor window, arched its back and hissed at the unfamiliar sound of the approaching carriage. Captain Brown's booming laugh shattered the town's hushed atmosphere like a stone through glass. His voice carried down the street, causing more than a few ladies to clutch their pearls in shock. The captain, with his ruddy cheeks and twinkling eyes, strode into town as if he owned it, his military bearing a stark contrast to the genteel slouch of Cranford's inhabitants. At tea parties, the captain spoke openly about his finances, his words dropping into polite conversation like bombs. "My pension's not much," he'd say with a hearty chuckle, "but it keeps us in tea and crumpets." The ladies would exchange wide-eyed glances, their teacups rattling in their saucers. The captain's friendship with Mr. Smith, Mary's father, blossomed like a hardy weed in Cranford's well-manicured garden of acquaintanceships. Their animated discussions about railroads and progress echoed through the town, stirring something in the younger residents. It was as if a window had been thrown open in a stuffy room, letting in fresh air and new ideas. Miss Jessie, the captain's younger daughter, moved through Cranford like a gentle stream, her sweet nature smoothing the ruffled feathers her father's presence had caused. Her willingness to adapt to Cranford's customs was like honey to the town's sometimes bitter tea. In stark contrast, Miss Brown, the elder daughter, was a shadow at the edge of town life. Her sickly nature and reclusive behavior made her an enigma, a locked door that the ladies of Cranford couldn't help but want to peek behind. Whispers followed her rare appearances, like autumn leaves skittering down the street. The equilibrium of Cranford teetered on the edge of chaos when Captain Brown began reading Charles Dickens' Pickwick papers in public. It was as if he had let a wild animal loose in the town square. Miss Deborah Jenkyns, her spine as stiff as the bindings of her beloved Dr. Johnson's works, was particularly offended. The tension between Captain Brown and Miss Deborah came to a head at Mrs. Jamieson's tea party. The drawing room, usually a sanctuary of polite murmurs and gentle gossip, became a battlefield. Words flew back and forth like arrows, each one aimed at the heart of the other's literary tastes. The other ladies watched, wide-eyed and silent, like spectators at a jousting match. But it was Captain Brown's act of kindness that truly scandalized Cranford. On a sunny afternoon, he was seen carrying parcels for a struggling widow and her children. This simple act was like a crack in a dam, threatening to flood Cranford with the realities it had long chosen to ignore. As the days passed, Captain Brown's influence seeped into the very fabric of Cranford society. Like water slowly eroding a rock, his actions and attitudes gradually began to shape the town's long-held beliefs and practices. The younger residents found themselves questioning the rigid social norms that had governed their lives, their minds opening like flowers to the sun. Miss Deborah and her allies stood firm, defending the traditional ways of Cranford with the tenacity of a gardener, protecting prized roses from an encroaching weed. Yet even as they fought to maintain the status quo, the winds of change whispered through the streets of Cranford, promising a future that would be both familiar and strange. As the sun set on another day in Cranford, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. An air of unease settled over the town. The distant whistle of an approaching train pierced the evening calm, a sound that would soon become all too familiar. Little did the residents know that this harbinger of progress would bring with it a tragedy that would shake Cranford to its very core, forever altering the lives of those who called it home. The tranquil town of Cranford was shaken to its core by a sudden tragedy. Miss Deborah Jenkyns, a pillar of the community, met her untimely end in a shocking accident at the railway crossing. The news spread like wildfire through the cobblestone streets, carried on hushed whispers and stifled sobs. The air grew thick with disbelief, as if the very atmosphere refused to accept this new reality. Miss Deborah, with her stern demeanor and unwavering principles, had been the North Star by which Cranford's social compass was set. Her absence left a gaping void, as palpable as a missing tooth in an otherwise perfect smile. On the day of the funeral, Cranford wore its grief like a heavy cloak. The entire town gathered, a sea of black-clad figures moving solemnly towards the church. The tolling of the bells seemed to echo the heartache of every resident, each somber note reverberating through their bones. Inside the church, the air was thick with the cloying scent of lilies and the muffled sounds of weeping. Miss Matty, Deborah's younger sister, sat in the front pew, her small frame seeming to shrink further under the weight of her loss. Her hands trembled as they clutched a damp handkerchief, her eyes fixed on the polished wood of her sister's coffin. In the days that followed, Miss Matty found herself adrift in a world suddenly too large and complex. Simple decisions that Deborah had always handled now loomed like insurmountable mountains. The creaking of the old house seemed to mock her indecision. Every tick of the clock, a sharp reminder of her sister's absence. She would often find herself standing in the middle of a room, paralyzed by the simplest of choices, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. But Cranford, for all its quirks and foibles, was a town that took care of its own. Like a flock of mother hens, the ladies of the town rallied around Miss Matty. Mrs. Jamieson, with her airs and graces, and the ever-curious Miss Pole, took turns inviting Miss Matty for tea. Their chatter filled the silence that threatened to engulf her, their presence a balm to her raw grief. The familiar ritual of pouring tea and passing delicate china cups became a lifeline, anchoring Miss Matty to the world of the living. Mary Smith, once an occasional visitor, now became Miss Matty's anchor. She extended her stay in Cranford, her practical nature a perfect complement to Miss Matty's gentle uncertainty. Together they navigated the unfamiliar waters of household management, Mary's steady hand guiding Miss Matty through the storm of her grief. Mary's voice, firm yet kind, became a constant in the house, gently coaxing Miss Matty back to the land of the living. As the weeks passed, a subtle change began to take root in Miss Matty. Like a flower long overshadowed by a mighty oak, she slowly began to unfurl. Her voice, once soft and acquiescent, grew firmer. She made decisions, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. The ladies of Cranford watched this transformation with a mixture of surprise and approval, adjusting their own behaviors to this new social order. Miss Matty's newfound strength was like a delicate sapling, fragile yet determined to grow. The power dynamics of Cranford shifted like sand dunes in a gentle breeze. Without Miss Deborah's formidable presence, new alliances formed and old ones strengthened. Yet amidst this change, there was a sense of continuity, a testament to the resilience of their little community. The town's rhythm, once dictated by Miss Deborah's iron will, now flowed more freely, like a river finding a new course. Perhaps the most unexpected development came from Captain Brown. The very man who had once locked horns with Miss Deborah over the merits of Mr. Boz now showed remarkable kindness to Miss Matty. His gruff exterior softened in her presence, and his considerate gestures did not go unnoticed by the watchful eyes of Cranford's residents. In this act of compassion, the captain endeared himself further to the townspeople, bridging the gap that had once existed between him and the late Miss Deborah. His deep, rumbling voice became a source of comfort for Miss Matty, a stark contrast to her sister's sharp tones. As the chapter of grief slowly began to close, a new one opened for Cranford and its inhabitants. The memory of Miss Deborah Jenkyns would always be honored, but life with all its joys and sorrows continued to flow like the river that ran through their beloved town. The air seemed lighter, the sun a little brighter, as if the town itself was exhaling after holding its breath for so long. One crisp autumn morning, as Miss Matty walked through the town square, her steps more assured than they had been in months, she felt a sudden jolt. Her heart began to race, her palms grew clammy, and the world around her seemed to blur. For there, across the square, stood a figure she thought she'd never see again. Miss Matty's heart skipped a beat as she unexpectedly encountered her long-lost love in Cranford. Miss Matty's heart skipped a beat as she unexpectedly encountered her long-lost love in Cranford. Mr. Thomas Holbrook stood before her in a local shop, stirring up a whirlwind of emotions and memories of their youthful romance. The world around them seemed to fade away, the cluttered aisles of the shop blurring into insignificance. Miss Matty felt a rush of warmth flood her cheeks, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her shopping basket. The familiar scent of lavender and old books wafted through the air, transporting her back to a time when their love had blossomed like a delicate spring flower. Mr. Holbrook, now a distinguished gentleman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, approached her with a gentle smile. His weathered hand spoke of years of hard work, but his refined manner revealed a man who had cultivated both land and mind. "Miss Matty," he said, his voice as warm and rich as she remembered. "It's been far too long." The sound of his voice sent a shiver down her spine, awakening long-dormant feelings. As they exchanged pleasantries, the years melted away like snow in the spring sun. Miss Matty found herself transported back to her youth, when their love had been nipped in the bud by her sister Deborah's disapproval of Mr. Holbrook's status as a farmer. With a twinkle in his eye, Mr. Holbrook extended an invitation that made Miss Matty's heart flutter. "Would you do me the honor of visiting my estate, Miss Matty?" he asked, his voice tinged with hope. Miss Matty hesitated, her mind racing with thoughts of propriety and what others might say. But the earnest look in Mr. Holbrook's eyes melted her reservations. With a small nod and a shy smile, she accepted, agreeing to bring along Mary Smith as a chaperone. The journey to Mr. Holbrook's estate was like a dream. The countryside rolled by in a patchwork of greens and golds, mirroring the mix of excitement and nervousness that churned in Miss Matty's stomach. As they approached the house, she gasped softly. It stood proud and welcoming, surrounded by well-tended gardens that seemed to reach out and embrace them. Mr. Holbrook greeted them at the door, his face alight with joy. "Welcome, welcome," he exclaimed, ushering them inside with the enthusiasm of a much younger man. The afternoon unfolded like the pages of a cherished book. They sat in Mr. Holbrook's cozy parlor, sharing stories of their lives over steaming cups of tea. The rich aroma of Earl Grey filled the air, mingling with the scent of old leather-bound books. Miss Matty found herself laughing more than she had in years, her eyes sparkling as Mr. Holbrook regaled them with tales of his adventures in farming and literature. "Come, let me show you my pride and joy," Mr. Holbrook said, leading them to his library. The room was a testament to his love of learning, with floor-to-ceiling shelves groaning under the weight of countless volumes. Miss Matty ran her fingers along the spines, marveling at the breadth of his collection. The musty smell of old paper and ink enveloped her, a comforting embrace of knowledge and history. Mr. Holbrook's eyes lit up as he pulled out a slim volume. "Ah, Tennyson," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "Listen to this, Miss Matty." He began to recite, his rich voice bringing the words to life, painting vivid pictures in the air around them. Miss Matty closed her eyes, letting the poetry wash over her like a gentle wave. As the day wore on, they strolled through Mr. Holbrook's gardens. The air was heavy with the scent of roses and honeysuckle, and Miss Matty felt a sense of peace settle over her. She watched Mr. Holbrook tend to a delicate bloom with the same care he had shown in reciting poetry, and her heart swelled with a bittersweet ache. But their newfound joy was to be short-lived. In the days that followed, word reached Cranford that Mr. Holbrook's health was failing rapidly. Despite warnings from his doctor, he embarked on a long-desired trip to Paris, determined to see the world he had only read about in books. The news of his return brought a flicker of hope to Miss Matty's heart, but it was quickly extinguished. Mr. Holbrook had pushed himself too far, and the exertion of the journey proved too much for his weakened constitution. As Miss Matty sat by her window, watching the world go by, she felt the weight of loss settle heavily upon her shoulders. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks as she reflected on the life they might have had together if circumstances had been different. The brief reunion had been like a candle flame, bright and beautiful, but all too quickly snuffed out. In the quiet of her room, Miss Matty began to reassess her life choices and the impact of societal expectations on her personal happiness. The bittersweet memories of her time with Mr. Holbrook would forever remain a testament to the power of love and the cruel hand of fate. As she wiped away her tears, a commotion outside caught her attention. People were gathering in the street, their voices raised in alarm. Miss Matty leaned out of her window, straining to hear what was causing such a stir. The words "Town and County Bank" and "failure" reached her ears, sending a chill down her spine. Little did she know that the tranquil town of Cranford was about to face an unprecedented crisis that would shake the very foundations of their quiet lives. The tranquil town of Cranford was about to face an unprecedented crisis. News of the impending failure of the Town and County Bank threatened to shatter the financial security of its residents. A crisp autumn breeze rustled through the streets, carrying with it whispers of impending doom. The air felt heavy, as if the weight of collective worry pressed down on every cobblestone and rooftop. In Miss Matty's cozy parlor, the tick of the grandfather clock seemed to grow louder, marking each passing moment of blissful ignorance before their world would change forever. Miss Matty's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter, the paper crackling like dry leaves underfoot. Her voice, usually as soft as a dove's coo, quavered as she read aloud to Mary Smith. Each word fell like a hammer blow, shattering their sense of security. "Oh my," Miss Matty breathed, her face paling to the shade of her lace collar. "Whatever shall we do?" Within hours, the streets of Cranford buzzed with anxious energy. The bank, once a bastion of stability, now loomed like a besieged fortress. A sea of worried faces formed snaking queues outside its doors, the line stretching around the corner like a great, restless serpent. Men in threadbare coats shifted from foot to foot, their eyes darting nervously. Women clutched worn purses to their chests as if they were lifelines. The air was thick with the mingled sense of fear-tinged sweat and desperation. Miss Matty, however, remained at home, a picture of quiet dignity amidst the storm. Her entire inheritance, the fruits of a lifetime of careful living, hung in the balance. Yet she sat ramrod straight in her favorite armchair, her resolve as firm as the starched lace at her wrists. "I shan't make a spectacle of myself," she said softly to Mary, her eyes a swirling mix of fear and resignation. "What will be, will be." As the crisis deepened, Cranford's carefully maintained facade began to crumble like plaster on a neglected wall. The genteel poverty that had long been the town's open secret was thrust into the harsh light of day. Residents who had always prided themselves on their ability to make do with little now faced the specter of true destitution. Into this maelstrom of worry and woe stepped Mary Smith's father, a banker of some repute. His arrival in Cranford was like a gust of fresh air in a stuffy room, bringing with it a glimmer of hope. With his keen eye and years of experience, he quickly assessed the dire state of the bank. "I'm afraid the situation is grave," he said, his voice a blend of professional detachment and genuine concern. "Miss Matty, your options are limited, but not non-existent." As he laid out the stark realities and potential paths forward, Miss Matty listened with the same quiet grace she had shown throughout the ordeal. Her acceptance of her changed circumstances was like a soothing balm to those around her, a reminder of the strength that lay beneath Cranford's genteel exterior. In the face of adversity, the true spirit of Cranford began to shine through like sunlight, breaking through storm clouds. The ladies of the town, despite their own financial worries, rallied around one another like a flock of protective mother hens. Mrs. Forrester, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, carefully wrapped her prized lace collection in tissue paper. The delicate fabric whispered against her fingers, each fold a bittersweet reminder of happier times. "It's just material," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "What matters is that we stand together." Others began to consider once unthinkable options. The idea of taking in lodgers or selling family heirlooms, once as scandalous as appearing in public without a bonnet, now seemed a small price to pay for survival. Miss Pole, her usual fluttery manner replaced by steely determination, organized a meeting to discuss ways to help those most affected. "We may not have much," she declared, her voice ringing out in the crowded parlor like a clarion call, "but what we have, we share." As the days wore on, the crisis revealed the true strength of Cranford's community spirit. Neighbors offered what little help they could, whether it was a warm meal, a sympathetic ear, or a few carefully hoarded coins. The town, like a family facing hard times, drew closer together, finding strength in unity. Through it all, Miss Matty remained a beacon of grace and acceptance. Even as she faced the prospect of a radically altered life, she refused to succumb to bitterness or blame. Her gentle nature shone through, like a candle flame steady in the face of a storm. "Those poor bank directors," she mused one evening, her knitting needles clicking softly in the firelight. "I can't help but think of the burden they must be carrying." Her words, spoken without a trace of irony, were a testament to the indomitable spirit that had seen Cranford through countless challenges. As the town faced an uncertain future, it was clear that this spirit would be their greatest asset in the trying times ahead. As night fell and the streets of Cranford grew quiet, Mary Smith sat alone in her room, her mind whirling with worry for Miss Matty. The gentle snores from the next room only heightened her sense of responsibility. How could she help her dear friend without wounding her pride? A plan began to form in Mary's mind, as delicate and intricate as Miss Matty's prize lace. With a determined set to her jaw, Mary reached for pen and paper. The ladies of Cranford needed to be summoned, and quickly. The future of one of their own hung in the balance. Mary Smith's heart ached as she witnessed Miss Matty's financial plight. Determined to help her dear friend without wounding her pride, Mary secretly organized a meeting with the other ladies of Cranford. The air in Miss Pole's cozy parlor crackled with anticipation as the ladies gathered, their whispers barely audible above the gentle ticking of the mantel clock. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the polished wood floor. The scent of freshly brewed tea and warm scones wafted through the room, a stark contrast to the gravity of their purpose. "Now, ladies," Miss Pole began, her voice hushed but firm, "we must swear to keep this meeting a secret. Miss Matty's dignity is at stake." Nods of agreement rippled through the group, their faces etched with concern and determination. Ideas flowed like the tea they sipped, each suggestion carefully considered and debated. The tension in the room ebbed and flowed like waves on a shore, rising with each rejected proposal and falling as new possibilities emerged. Finally, like a ray of sunshine breaking through storm clouds, the perfect solution dawned on them. Miss Matty would open a small tea shop in her home, a respectable venture that would provide her with much-needed income while maintaining her social standing. Mary's father, a pillar of support in this clandestine operation, secured a license for the shop with the efficiency of a seasoned businessman. His connections in London yielded a reputable tea merchant, ensuring Miss Matty would have the finest leaves to offer her customers. The ladies, united in their mission, contributed funds with the discretion of secret agents. Their aid was cleverly disguised as loans or advance payments for tea, a web of white lies spun with the best of intentions. Mrs. Forrester, her eyes twinkling with excitement, offered her remaining lace to decorate the shop. "It's been sitting in my drawer for years," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "Now it will have a purpose again." Miss Pole, not to be outdone, provided a set of shelves, their polished wood gleaming with promise. "They'll display the tea canisters beautifully," she declared, already envisioning the shop's layout. When the ladies presented their plan to Miss Matty, her reaction was a mixture of surprise, hesitation, and gratitude. Her gentle face, lined with worry, softened as she listened to their enthusiastic explanations. "But trade?" she whispered, her voice quavering like a leaf in the wind. "Won't it lower my standing in society?" Mary took Miss Matty's trembling hands in hers, her voice soft but resolute. "Dear Miss Matty, times are changing. This is a respectable business, and Cranford needs a good tea shop. Who better to run it than you, with your impeccable taste and warm hospitality?" Slowly, like a flower unfurling its petals to the sun, Miss Matty's resistance melted away. The practical necessity of her situation, combined with the unwavering support of her friends, gently nudged her towards acceptance. The transformation of Miss Matty's front room into a charming tea shop was nothing short of magical. Shelves were arranged with military precision, each tea canister placed just so. Mrs. Forrester's lace adorned the windows and tables, lending an air of elegance to the space. A discreet sign, hand-painted with care, was placed in the window, announcing Miss Matty's Tea Shop to the world. The grand opening was a carefully orchestrated affair, a performance worthy of the finest theater in London. The ladies of Cranford arrived in a steady stream, their excitement barely contained beneath their prim exteriors. They made a show of examining the tea selection, exclaiming over the quality and variety with the enthusiasm of connoisseurs. "Oh, Miss Matty," Mrs. Jamieson declared, her voice carrying through the shop. "This Earl Grey is simply divine. I must have a pound of it." To maintain Miss Matty's dignity, the ladies insisted on being served in the parlor rather than the shop itself. This arrangement, born of kindness, soon became a cherished tradition. The parlor, once a quiet sanctuary, now buzzed with the gentle hum of conversation and the clink of fine china. As word spread of Miss Matty's exquisite teas and warm hospitality, the shop's success blossomed like a well-tended garden. Regular tea tastings became the talk of the town, drawing curious customers from neighboring villages. These events were a feast for the senses, with the rich aromas of various teas mingling with the sweet scent of freshly baked treats. Miss Matty, initially nervous and unsure, grew more confident with each passing day. Her eyes, once clouded with worry, now sparkled with pride as she recommended blends and shared brewing tips with her customers. The tea shop had become more than just a source of income. It was a new chapter in her life, filled with purpose and joy. The success of this venture was a testament to the strength and resourcefulness of Cranford's female-dominated society. Like a tapestry woven from threads of compassion, ingenuity, and solidarity, the ladies had come together to support one of their own. Their actions had not only secured Miss Matty's financial future, but had also created a new social hub for the town, a place where friendships were strengthened over steaming cups of tea and shared confidences. As the sun set on another busy day at the shop, Miss Matty stood in the doorway, watching the last of her customers disappear down the cobblestone street. A gentle breeze carried the lingering scent of bergamot and jasmine, and she smiled, feeling truly at home in her new role. The tea shop had become more than just a business. It was a symbol of the unbreakable bonds of friendship that held Cranford together, as strong and comforting as the perfect cup of tea. Just as Miss Matty was about to close the shop for the day, a commotion erupted outside. Curious faces peered out of windows, and whispers spread like wildfire through the streets. Miss Matty's heart raced as she stepped onto the cobblestones, her eyes widening in disbelief. There at the end of the street stood a figure she thought she'd never see again. Could it be? After all these years. The air seemed to crackle with electricity as the stranger approached, and Miss Matty's world tilted on its axis. The tranquil town of Cranford was about to be shaken to its very core. The tranquil town of Cranford was shaken to its core by an unexpected event. Peter Jenkyns, Miss Matty's long-lost brother, who had vanished to India decades ago, had suddenly returned. The air in Cranford seemed to crackle with anticipation, like the moments before a summer storm. It all began with a letter, its crispy envelope adorned with exotic stamps that set tongues wagging even before the seal was broken. Miss Matty's hands trembled as she held the missive, her heart racing with a mix of hope and trepidation. As she read the contents, her eyes widened, and a small gasp escaped her lips. The news was almost too extraordinary to believe. Her dear brother Peter, absent for so long, was coming home. The words on the page blurred as tears welled up in her eyes, years of longing and worry melting away in an instant. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Miss Matty fluttered about her home like a hummingbird, her usual calm demeanor replaced by nervous energy. She dusted forgotten corners, her feather duster stirring up motes that danced in the sunbeams streaming through freshly cleaned windows. The scent of lemon polish and lavender sachets filled the air as she prepared for Peter's arrival. Her friends rallied around her, their excitement palpable. They brought over their best china and linens, determined that Peter's homecoming would be nothing short of perfect. The ladies of Cranford buzzed with speculation, wondering how the years had changed the once wild Peter Jenkyns. When the day finally arrived, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. The clip-clop of horse hooves on cobblestones echoed through the streets, growing louder as the carriage approached. Miss Matty stood on her doorstep, her hands clasped tightly to stop their shaking. The carriage door swung open, and out stepped a figure straight from the pages of an adventure novel. Peter Jenkyns stood tall, his skin tanned and weathered by foreign suns, his eyes twinkling with the promise of untold tales. For a moment, time stood still as brother and sister locked eyes across the years that had separated them. "Oh, Peter," Miss Matty whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Is it really you?" Peter's laugh was warm and rich, like honey poured over the bitter years of separation. "It's me, dear Matty. I've come home at last." Propriety forgotten, Miss Matty rushed forward, enveloping her brother in a fierce embrace. The scent of exotic spices clung to his clothes, a tangible reminder of the vast distance he had traveled to return to her. In the days that followed, Peter's return became the talk of Cranford. He held court in Miss Matty's parlor, regaling wide-eyed listeners with tales of his exploits in India. His voice would drop to a dramatic whisper as he described the steamy jungles and bustling bazaars, transporting his audience far from their cozy sitting rooms. "Picture, if you will," he'd say, leaning forward conspiratorially, "a jungle so thick you can barely see the sky. And there, in the shadows, the gleam of a tiger's eyes." His listeners would gasp, their imaginations painting vivid pictures of a world so different from their own. The very air in the room seemed to change, filled with the imagined sense of cardamom and saffron, the distant trumpeting of elephants. For Miss Matty, Peter's return was nothing short of a miracle. The weight of running her modest tea shop lifted from her shoulders as Peter insisted on providing for her. "No sister of mine will want for anything," he declared, his voice brooking no argument. Miss Matty felt years younger, buoyed by her brother's presence and the security he brought. In the quiet evenings, brother and sister would sit by the fire, bridging the gap of years with gentle conversation. The crackling flames cast a warm glow on their faces as Peter's eyes grew misty, speaking of his regrets for staying away so long. Miss Matty would pat his hand, her forgiveness as warm and enveloping as a favorite blanket. "Tell me about Cranford," Peter would say, eager to reacquaint himself with the town of his youth, and Miss Matty would oblige, her soft voice painting pictures of the small changes and enduring traditions that made Cranford what it was. Peter's influence on the town was swift and profound. He introduced new games from his travels, much to the delight of the younger set. The thwack of croquet mallets was replaced by the unfamiliar sounds of games played in far-off lands. The green lawns of Cranford became stages for exotic pastimes, filled with laughter and the excitement of new experiences. The ladies of Cranford found themselves captivated by this worldly gentleman in their midst. Even the most proper among them couldn't help but be charmed by Peter's wit and the twinkle in his eye that spoke of secrets and adventures. Tea parties buzzed with discussions of distant shores and different ways of life, as if the world had suddenly grown larger and Cranford with it. For Miss Matty, her brother's return meant more than just financial security. It was the fulfillment of a dream long deferred, the healing of a wound she had carried for decades. As she watched Peter charm the townsfolk and bring a spark of excitement to their quiet lives, she felt a warmth in her heart that had nothing to do with the tea she sipped. Peter threw himself into the role of protector and benefactor with gusto. He took an interest in town affairs, gently suggesting improvements based on his experiences abroad. His ideas, once considered radical, were now met with eager interest. The town began to stir with a new energy, like a flower slowly unfurling its petals to the sun. As the days passed, Cranford found itself forever changed. The town had been touched by the wider world, its horizons broadened by the tales and presence of the prodigal son. And in the center of it all stood Miss Matty and Peter, reunited at last, their bond stronger than ever as they faced the future together in their beloved Cranford. Yet as the excitement of Peter's return began to settle, a new whisper of change rippled through the town. Rumors spread of newcomers on the horizon, families from the city seeking the quaint charm of Cranford. As the sun set on another day, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets, Miss Matty and Peter stood at the window watching. The air seemed charged with possibility and a hint of uncertainty. What would these new arrivals bring to their carefully ordered world? Only time would tell, and Cranford stood poised on the brink of a new chapter in its history. Cranford, a town steeped in tradition, stood on the precipice of change. An influx of new residents was about to arrive, bringing with them fresh perspectives and challenges to the established order. The cobblestone streets, once echoing only with familiar footsteps, now resonated with the clatter of unfamiliar carriages. The air, usually scented with the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread and blooming roses, now carried hints of exotic perfumes and foreign spices. Dr. Hoggins, a young and ambitious physician, was the first to breach the town's invisible barriers. His arrival sent ripples through the community like a stone dropped in a still pond. The retiring Dr. Morgan's practice, a bastion of old-fashioned medicine, was now home to shiny new instruments and bottles of unfamiliar medicines that gleamed in the shop window. Passers-by couldn't help but pause, their curious glances and hushed whispers creating a buzz of excitement and apprehension. Miss Pole, her gray curls quivering with indignation, became the unofficial voice of skepticism. "Well, I never," she exclaimed, her teacup rattling against its saucer as she addressed her circle of friends. "These newfangled ideas will be the death of us all." The ladies nodded in agreement, their china cups clinking nervously, a symphony of porcelain anxiety. Yet, as the weeks passed, Dr. Hoggins began to win over even the most stubborn hearts. His gentle manner, as soothing as a cool compress on a feverish brow, and his undeniable skill in treating ailments slowly chipped away at their resistance. The turning point came when he successfully treated old Mrs. Forrester's gout, a condition that had left her housebound for months, her world shrinking to the size of her parlor. "It's as if he's worked magic," Mrs. Forrester gushed, wiggling her toes with newfound freedom, her face alight with joy. Her praise spread through Cranford like wildfire, igniting curiosity and hope in equal measure. Soon Dr. Hoggins found his waiting room filled with patients eager to experience his modern miracles, the scent of antiseptic mingling with that of anticipation. As the town was still adjusting to their new doctor, the Gordons swept into Cranford like a gust of fresh air, bringing with them the intoxicating scent of change. They moved into the grand house on the outskirts of town, its windows gleaming with new life after years of neglect, like eyes opening after a long slumber. Mrs. Gordon, with her fashionable London dresses that rustled with every movement and elaborate hairstyles that defied gravity, became the talk of the town. Her dinner parties were the stuff of legend, with exotic dishes that tantalized the taste buds and sparkling conversation that left the Cranford ladies both scandalized and secretly thrilled. The scent of unfamiliar spices wafted from the Gordon kitchen, tempting even the most conservative palates, a siren call of culinary adventure. "Did you see her dress at church on Sunday?" whispered Mrs. Jamieson behind her fan, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and admiration. "All that silk and those feathers. It's not proper at all." Yet within weeks, subtle changes began to appear in the ladies' own wardrobes. A touch of lace here, a brighter color there, as if Mrs. Gordon's influence was seeping into the very fabric of Cranford society, dyeing it with vibrant hues of change. The Gordon children brought their own brand of excitement to the sleepy town. Their laughter, high and clear as bell chimes, echoed through the streets as they introduced new games to the local children. Soon, the sound of hoops rolling and skipping ropes, slapping against the cobblestones, became a common melody in Cranford, a joyful soundtrack to the town's transformation. Amidst this whirlwind of change, Mr. Graves, the new curate, arrived. Young, handsome, and full of progressive ideas, he set many a heart aflutter. His sermons, delivered with passion and a touch of poetry, drew larger crowds to the church each Sunday. The younger ladies of Cranford found themselves paying extra attention to their appearance on Sundays, their cheeks flushed with more than just religious fervor, their hearts beating a little faster beneath their Sunday best. As Cranford grappled with these changes, Miss Matty emerged as an unexpected bridge between the old and the new. Influenced by her brother Peter's tales of far-off lands and different cultures, she saw the value in embracing change while honoring tradition. With a twinkle in her eye and a spring in her step, Miss Matty began hosting tea parties that brought together the newcomers and the old guard of Cranford. Her parlor became a neutral ground where Mrs. Gordon's London gossip mingled with Miss Pole's local news, and where Dr. Hoggins could discuss his latest medical advancements without raising eyebrows. The clinking of teacups and the murmur of conversation created a soothing backdrop to the merging of two worlds. "Change, my dears," Miss Matty would say, pouring tea with a steady hand, her voice as warm and comforting as the brew itself, "is like a strong cup of kongu. It might seem bitter at first, but given time and a little sweetness, it can be quite refreshing." As the summer sun set on Cranford, casting a golden glow over the town's ancient buildings and newly planted gardens, a sense of harmony began to settle. The blend of old and new, tradition and progress, created a richer tapestry of life in the little town. Miss Matty's tea parties continued to foster understanding and acceptance, bridging the gap between the familiar past and the exciting, if somewhat daunting, future that lay ahead for Cranford and its residents. Yet as the town settled into its new rhythm, a whisper began to circulate, growing louder with each passing day. Lady Glenmire was coming to Cranford. The news hung in the air like a storm cloud, promising to unleash a deluge that would wash away the fragile peace. As night fell, the townspeople retired to their beds, unaware that the tranquil town of Cranford was about to experience a seismic shift in its social fabric, one that would test the limits of their newfound acceptance and shake the very foundations of their society. The tranquil town of Cranford was about to experience a seismic shift in its social fabric. Lady Glenmire, Mrs. Jamieson's widowed sister-in-law, had unexpectedly married Mr. Hoggins, the town's doctor. The news rippled through the community like a stone thrown into a still pond, sending waves of shock and disbelief in its wake. Spring had arrived in Cranford, painting the town in soft hues of green and pink. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. But beneath this serene surface, a secret garden of love had been growing, hidden from prying eyes and wagging tongues. Lady Glenmire and Mr. Hoggins' courtship had unfolded in hushed whispers and stolen glances. Their affection blossomed like the delicate petals of a rose, unnoticed by most until it was in full bloom. When the news of their engagement finally broke, it was as if a thunderclap had shattered the town's peaceful routine. Mrs. Jamieson's drawing room became the epicenter of the shock. The usually composed lady's hand trembled as she set down her teacup, the china rattling against the saucer. Her face, normally a mask of polite indifference, contorted with disbelief and indignation. "It's simply not done," she declared, her voice quivering with emotion. "A lady of her standing marrying a country doctor." The words seemed to leave a bitter taste in her mouth, her lips pursing as if she had bitten into a particularly sour lemon. The news spread through Cranford like wildfire, igniting passionate debates in every corner of the town. Miss Pole's garden, usually a haven of tranquility, buzzed with the sound of scandalized whispers. The gentle rustle of leaves was drowned out by the clucking of tongues and the shaking of heads. "How could she?" Miss Pole lamented, her fingers nervously twisting the lace of her cuffs. "It's a fall from grace. Mark my words." But not everyone shared this sentiment. In the cozy parlor of Miss Matty's home, a different atmosphere prevailed. The soft glow of candlelight illuminated her gentle features as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Love," she said, her eyes misting over with memories, "is a rare and precious thing. Who are we to stand in its way?" The words hung in the air, fragile and beautiful, like the delicate china figurines that adorned her mantelpiece. Lady Glenmire, now Mrs. Hoggins, faced the storm with a grace that was both admirable and infuriating to her detractors. She moved through the town like a ship cutting through choppy waters, her head held high and a warm smile on her face. The soft rustle of her skirts and the gentle tap of her shoes on the cobblestones became a familiar sound in the streets of Cranford. In her new role as a doctor's wife, she brought a touch of aristocratic charm to Mr. Hoggins' practice. The sterile smell of medicine was softened by the subtle scent of her lavender perfume. Nervous patients found themselves soothed by her gentle manner and quick wit, their fears melting away like morning mist under the warmth of her smile. The town found itself divided, much like a garden with a new and controversial flower planted in its midst. Some turned their backs, refusing to acknowledge the bloom, while others cautiously approached, curious despite themselves. Mrs. Jamieson's doors remained firmly shut to the couple, the sound of the lock turning a silent but powerful statement of disapproval that echoed through the town. Yet as days turned to weeks, the initial shock began to wear off. The sight of Mrs. Hoggins assisting her husband, her laughter ringing out like a bell as she chatted with patients, became a familiar and not altogether unpleasant part of Cranford life. Miss Matty, seizing the opportunity, began to host small gatherings, carefully orchestrating meetings between Mrs. Hoggins and her former social circle. These gatherings were tense affairs at first, with conversation as stilted as a poorly oiled hinge. The clink of teacups and the rustle of skirts seemed unnaturally loud in the awkward silence. But gradually, as teacups were refilled and biscuits shared, the atmosphere began to thaw. Mrs. Hoggins' genuine happiness, which radiated from her like warmth from a hearth, was difficult to resist. Even the most staunch opponents found their resolve weakening in the face of such evident contentment. The turning point came with an invitation that fluttered through Cranford like a flock of startled birds. The Hoggins were hosting a dinner party. The town held its collective breath, wondering who would dare to attend. Would it be a resounding success or a humiliating failure? On the night of the party, Cranford buzzed with anticipation. The air was electric with excitement and trepidation. One by one, guests arrived at the Hoggins' door, some with hesitation, others with barely concealed curiosity. The house glowed with warmth and welcome, the sounds of laughter and conversation spilling out into the street like a joyful melody. Inside, Mrs. Hoggins moved among her guests with the ease of a seasoned hostess, her joy infectious. The soft candlelight caught the sparkle in her eyes and the flush on her cheeks. Mr. Hoggins, usually gruff and to the point, revealed a softer side, his eyes following his wife with unmistakable adoration. As the evening progressed, the initial awkwardness melted away like frost in the morning sun. Even the most skeptical guests found themselves won over by the genuine happiness that permeated the air. As the last guest departed, their farewells warm and sincere, a shift had occurred in Cranford. The rigid lines that had once divided the town began to blur, like watercolors bleeding into one another. Even Mrs. Jamieson, who had staunchly refused to attend, found herself softening. The next day she was overheard asking about the party, her curiosity getting the better of her pride. The marriage of Lady Glenmire and Mr. Hoggins had done more than unite two people in love. It had become a catalyst for change in Cranford, encouraging a new openness and flexibility in social interactions. As spring gave way to summer, the town found itself embracing a newfound warmth, not just in the air, but in their hearts as well. But as the sun set on this day of newfound harmony, a chill wind began to blow through the streets of Cranford. The cheerful chatter in the town square was suddenly silenced by the ominous tolling of the church bell. A sense of foreboding settled over the town like a heavy blanket, leaving everyone with an inexplicable feeling of dread. Little did they know that by morning, their world would be turned upside down once again, but this time not by joy, but by sorrow. The town of Cranford was plunged into mourning. Mrs. Jamieson, a pillar of the community and the town's last true connection to aristocracy, had passed away. A heavy silence hung over the cobblestone streets, broken only by the muffled sobs of grieving residents. The news of Mrs. Jamieson's illness had spread like wildfire, carried on hushed whispers and concerned glances. Her decline was swift and severe, leaving the townspeople reeling. Dr. Hoggins's carriage became a fixture outside Mrs. Jamieson's grand home, its wheels leaving deep tracks in the gravel drive. The doctor's weathered hands and kind eyes offered what comfort they could, but even his expertise couldn't halt the inevitable. As word of her worsening condition reached every corner of Cranford, the ladies of the town rallied. They organized themselves into a rotation, each taking turns to sit with Mrs. Jamieson in her final days. The sick room filled with the rustle of skirts and the gentle murmur of prayers, a testament to the deep respect and affection the community held for her. When the end came, it was as if a great oak had fallen in the forest of Cranford society. The town held its breath, unsure how to move forward without the steady presence of Mrs. Jamieson. Her passing marked more than just the loss of a beloved resident. It signaled the end of an era, the last echoes of a more formal, genteel past fading away like mist in the morning sun. The funeral was a grand affair, befitting Mrs. Jamieson's status. People from all walks of life gathered, their differences in social standing momentarily forgotten in shared grief. The church bells tolled solemnly, their deep resonance echoing through the narrow streets and sending shivers down the spines of mourners. Lady Glenmire, now Mrs. Hoggins, took charge of the funeral arrangements with a grace that bridged her new life and old connections. Her presence was a balm to the grieving town, a reminder that change, while difficult, could also bring unexpected blessings. In the days that followed, the ladies of Cranford found themselves gathering more frequently, drawn together by a need to reminisce and reflect. They shared tea and memories, the delicate china cups clinking softly as they recalled Mrs. Jamieson's quirks and kindnesses in equal measure. Laughter mingled with tears as they remembered her insistence on proper etiquette and her secret fondness for gossip. "Do you remember," Miss Pole would say, her eyes twinkling despite the sadness, "how she always insisted on using her ear trumpet, even when we all knew she could hear perfectly well without it?" These gatherings took on a bittersweet tone, as the ladies couldn't help but contemplate their own mortality. The changing face of their beloved Cranford seemed to mirror the changes in their own lives, a reminder that time marched on relentlessly, like the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in Mrs. Jamieson's now empty parlor. As the initial shock of loss began to fade, curiosity about Mrs. Jamieson's estate bubbled to the surface. Speculation ran rampant about who would inherit her stately home and impressive collection of silver. The resolution of her estate, when it came, sent ripples of surprise through the town like stones thrown into a still pond. In a move that left everyone astounded, Mrs. Jamieson had bequeathed her house to the town itself. Her will stipulated that it be transformed into a library and meeting place, open to all residents regardless of their social standing. It was as if, in her final act, Mrs. Jamieson had decided to break down the very barriers she had so long upheld. Lady Glenmire, to everyone's further amazement, inherited a portion of Mrs. Jamieson's wealth. This unexpected turn of events further blurred the lines between social classes, causing many in Cranford to reassess their long-held beliefs about status and worth. As the dust settled and the town adjusted to its new reality, a subtle shift began to take place. The rigid social hierarchies that had long defined Cranford began to soften, like ice melting in the spring sun. People started to realize that character and kindness held more value than titles or wealth. It was as if Mrs. Jamieson's passing had opened their eyes to a new way of seeing their community and each other. In this time of transition and loss, Miss Matty emerged as a unifying figure. Her gentle influence and kind heart helped guide the town through its period of change. With quiet determination, she worked to bring people together, organizing small gatherings and encouraging acts of kindness that rippled through the community. As autumn leaves began to fall, painting the streets of Cranford in shades of gold and crimson, the town found itself changed but not diminished. The spirit of community that Mrs. Jamieson had, in her own way, always championed, now flourished in ways she might never have imagined. And in this, perhaps, lay her true legacy, a Cranford united not by class or wealth, but by the bonds of friendship and shared experience. Yet as the townspeople began to embrace this new chapter in their lives, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. The winds of change that had swept through Cranford with Mrs. Jamieson's passing seemed to be gathering strength. As night fell and the street lamps flickered to life, casting long shadows across the cobblestones, one couldn't help but wonder, what further transformations lay in store for this quaint town that had long resisted the march of progress? Cranford stood at the precipice of transformation. The quaint town, long resistant to change, was beginning to embrace the winds of progress that swept across England. The arrival of the railroad in a neighboring town sent ripples of excitement and fear through Cranford's narrow cobblestone streets. The very mention of the iron beast sparked heated debates in drawing rooms and over delicate china teacups. Miss Pole, her voice quavering with emotion, declared it a harbinger of doom, while others whispered of the wonders it might bring, their eyes alight with curiosity. As spring blossomed into summer, the younger inhabitants of Cranford grew bolder. They began taking day trips to Manchester, returning with wide eyes and breathless tales of towering buildings that seemed to scrape the sky, streets teeming with people from all walks of life, and fashions so daring they made even the most progressive Cranford resident blush and fan themselves vigorously. The town square, once bathed only in the warm, flickering glow of gas lamps and starlight, became the epicenter of Cranford's great debate. The proposed installation of gas lighting divided the community like a lightning bolt splitting an ancient oak. Traditional voices cried out against the harsh glare of progress, while others yearned for the brilliance of a new era, their arguments echoing off the weathered stone buildings. Peter Jenkyns, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of his worldly experiences, stood before the town council. His impassioned speech painted a vivid picture of a Cranford that embraced the future while cherishing its past. The council chamber buzzed with whispers and nods, the air thick with tension. When the votes were finally tallied, progress had won the day by the narrowest of margins. Miss Matty, once the very embodiment of Cranford's resistance to change, surprised everyone, perhaps even herself. Influenced by Peter's colorful stories of far-off lands, she became an unexpected champion of measured progress. Her gentle voice, soft as a summer breeze, carried weight as she encouraged her friends to sample new experiences. The exotic Indian tea that now graced her shop's shelves became a symbol of Cranford's cautious steps into a wider world. The tea shop, no longer a financial necessity for Miss Matty, transformed into a vibrant hub of social discourse. Ladies gathered around tables, their conversations a blend of local gossip and global events. The aroma of foreign teas mingled with the familiar scent of freshly baked scones, creating a heady perfume of old and new. In Mrs. Jamieson's former residence, a small lending library took root. Its shelves, once bare and dusty, now groaned under the weight of contemporary literature and newspapers from as far as London. The rustle of pages and the scratch of pens filled the air as Cranford's residents devoured new ideas and penned their thoughts, their minds expanding like flowers reaching for the sun. Mr. Graves, the young curate with a twinkle in his eye and passion in his voice, breathed life into the town's intellectual pursuits. His book club meetings became a highlight of the social calendar, with heated discussions on both timeless classics and modern works echoing through parlors long into the evening. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on animated faces as ideas were debated with newfound fervor. Mary Smith's visits from the city brought a breath of fresh air to Cranford. Her fashionable attire and new social customs raised eyebrows at first, but soon inspired imitation. Ladies experimented with new hairstyles and daring accessories, their attempts sometimes leading to good-natured laughter among friends. The town hummed with the excitement of self-discovery and reinvention. Inspired by Peter's sketches from India, a small art society blossomed. Amateur artists gathered in the town's picturesque spots, their canvases capturing Cranford's blend of old and new. The annual exhibition became a cherished event, showcasing the town's hidden talents and evolving aesthetic. The paintings hung on the walls like windows into Cranford's soul, revealing both its timeless charm and its growing aspirations. Yet amidst all this change, Cranford's heart remained true. The essence of the town, its warmth, its quirks, its sense of community, persevered like a steadfast lighthouse in a sea of transformation. Ladies still gathered for card parties and afternoon teas, but now their conversations were peppered with discussions of scientific discoveries and world events, their minds expanding beyond the town's borders. As the sun set on another day in Cranford, casting long shadows across the newly lit town square, one could sense the delicate balance the town had struck. It was a place where tradition and progress walked hand in hand, where the charm of the past mingled with the promise of the future. The ladies of Cranford, adaptable as ever, had woven new threads into the fabric of their beloved community, creating a tapestry richer and more vibrant than ever before. But as the town embraced change, a bittersweet undercurrent began to flow. Mary Smith, who had become such an integral part of Cranford's transformation, felt a growing unease. The letter in her pocket, offering a position as a companion to a lady in a nearby town, weighed heavily on her heart. As she watched the gas lamps flicker to life in the square, casting a warm glow over the familiar faces of her friends, Mary realized that her time in this beloved town was drawing to a close. How could she leave Cranford now, just as it was blossoming into something new and exciting? The thought of bidding farewell to this place she had grown to love filled her with a deep, aching sadness. As night fell, Mary found herself torn between duty and desire, wondering if she had the strength to say goodbye to Cranford and all it had come to mean to her. Mary Smith's heart weighed heavy as the day of her departure from Cranford loomed near. She had accepted a position as a companion to a lady in a nearby town, and now the time had come to bid farewell to the place she had grown to love. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of Mary's room, casting dappled shadows on the worn wooden floor. She stood before her open trunk, carefully folding each dress and memento, her fingers lingering on the familiar fabrics. The air hung thick with nostalgia, each breath a bitter-sweet reminder of the life she was leaving behind. With trembling hands, Mary clasped her reticule and stepped out into the cobblestone streets of Cranford. The town seemed to whisper its goodbyes with every step she took. The clip-clop of her shoes echoed off the buildings, a steady rhythm to accompany the pounding of her heart. Her first stop was Mrs. Forrester's quaint cottage. The older woman's eyes misted over as she pressed a delicate lace handkerchief into Mary's palm. "For your tears, my dear," she said softly, her voice catching. The scent of lavender clung to the fabric, a fragrant reminder of afternoon teas and shared confidences. Miss Pole's house was next, its windows gleaming in the morning sun. The spinster presented Mary with a small book of poetry, its pages soft and worn from frequent reading. "Words to comfort you when you're far from home," Miss Pole explained, her usual brisk manner softened by emotion. As Mary approached Miss Matty's home, her steps slowed. The weight of this goodbye pressed upon her chest, making each breath a conscious effort. Miss Matty stood in the doorway, her silver hair catching the light, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "My dear girl," Miss Matty said, her voice quavering as she took Mary's hand in her own. "You've become like a daughter to me." From a small velvet box, she produced a locket, its silver surface gleaming. "A lock of my hair," she explained, fastening it around Mary's neck. "So you'll always have a piece of Cranford with you." The cool metal against Mary's skin felt like an anchor, tethering her to this place she had come to call home. She blinked rapidly, trying to stem the tide of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. As the day wore on, Mary found herself once again at Miss Matty's, this time surrounded by the ladies of Cranford. The house buzzed with chatter and laughter, a farewell tea party in her honor. The air was perfumed with the scent of freshly baked scones and fragrant tea, a comforting aroma that Mary knew she would miss dearly. Teacups clinked gently against saucers as the ladies reminisced about shared experiences. They spoke of Captain Brown's arrival, which had once seemed so disruptive, but now felt like a cherished memory. They marveled at the recent modernizations in town, each change met with a mix of excitement and trepidation. As evening settled over Cranford, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Peter Jenkyns leaned forward in his chair, eyes twinkling with mischief. "Ladies," he announced, "I have one last tale of India to share." The room fell silent, all eyes on Peter, as he spun a story of adventure and wonder. Mary found herself transported to exotic lands, the sights and sounds of India coming alive in her imagination. Laughter bubbled up from the group, a joyous sound that seemed to make the very walls of the house vibrate with happiness. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, a perfect Cranford day. As Mary's carriage waited, she took one last walk through the town. The cobblestones beneath her feet seemed to pulse with memories, each step a farewell to a place she had grown to love. She noticed Miss Pole, her bonnet slightly askew in her excitement, sharing some juicy piece of news with a group of ladies who hung on her every word. Dr. and Mrs. Hoggins strolled arm in arm down the street, their acceptance into the community now complete. A young woman Mary didn't recognize hurried past, her face bright with anticipation. Mary smiled, realizing that Cranford would continue to welcome newcomers, even as it held fast to its cherished traditions. As the carriage began to pull away, Mary's gaze fell upon Miss Matty and Peter, waving from their garden. They stood like sentinels, guardians of the warmth and hospitality that defined Cranford. The image burned itself into Mary's memory, a final snapshot of the place that had shaped her. The clip-clop of horses' hooves marked the rhythm of Mary's departure. She felt a curious mix of sadness and gratitude wash over her, like waves lapping at the shore. As Cranford receded into the distance, Mary closed her eyes, breathing in the last wisps of its familiar scent. She fingered the locket at her throat, feeling the weight of all she was leaving behind. Yet as the carriage rolled on, Mary felt a spark of excitement for the adventures that lay ahead. She knew with a certainty that settled deep in her bones that Cranford had prepared her for whatever life might bring. The town that had welcomed her, shaped her, and loved her would always be a part of her. And though she was leaving, Mary knew that Cranford would continue to thrive. It would evolve, yes, but it would always remain true to its essential nature, a haven of gentility, friendship, and quiet adventures. As the last rooftop disappeared from view, Mary smiled, ready to carry the spirit of Cranford with her into the world beyond.
This book was generated using Speakter's AI voices. You can create human-like voiceovers in over 50 languages.